Have you ever wondered how the vegetarians of the past used to eat before the invention of Beyond Burgers and vegan cheeses on grocery store shelves? Hi, I'm Val from Very Vegan Val, and today we're going to be exploring 3 vintage tofu recipes and decide if they are worth reviving or if they should be left in the past. I'm going to be using this book, the Book of Tofu, Protein Sources for the Future, now. This book is by Akiko Aoyagi and William Shurtleff. It was first published in 1975, which, believe it or not, is basically 50 years ago now. It goes into a lot of detail into how to make your own tofu and the different products and ingredients that are associated with that, like soybeans and okara. I would say that this book is almost vegetarian. Most of the recipes in here are vegetarian, so it does include recipes with eggs and cheese. And then it does also include a few recipes with things like Worcestershire sauce and bonito flakes, both of which contain fish products. So I would say you could either describe this as almost vegetarian or pescatarian light. I've picked 3 recipes to try today. One of them I'm pretty sure will be delicious. Another one I'm very, very dubious about. And the third one I think could go either way. So let's start off with that third one. The first instruction is to saute onions in oil. It only says to saute the onions for 3 minutes. And so even though my onions are still pretty raw, I'm going to move on to step 2. Next, they have us add 1 tomato, but they don't really clarify beyond that. They could mean anything between a cherry tomato and a large heirloom tomato. I'm going with this larger variety because I think if you're going to call it a tomato soup, you're going to want to maximize the amount of tomato in the recipe. Again, it only says to cook the tomatoes for about 2 to 3 minutes. So let's go on to the next step of the recipe. Next, they have us add milk. I'm using oat milk, salt, pepper, and some spices. They suggest garlic, oregano, garlic powder, or marjoram. I'm gonna go with a clove of garlic as well as some oregano. There is also a bit of an error in the recipe here because they both suggest that you add the tofu now and in the next step. I'm just gonna wait and add it in the next step. Again, it only has you cook this for another minute, so I'm gonna raise the heat and really get the most out of my minute of cook time. Next, we're gonna blend the soup with the tofu. There it is blended. I'm going to keep an open mind here, but I do feel like maybe we didn't cook things quite long enough and maybe we didn't have quite enough tomato. But that's how I would do things now. So let's see how this ends up tasting. They suggest that you chill this soup before trying it and serve it with fresh parsley. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this chilling now. While tofu is relatively new to us in the so-called Western world, it's believed to have first been made in China around 200 BCE. It's been commonly eaten around Asia for thousands of years now, both as a meat alternative, but also just as an everyday ingredient that both meat eaters and vegetarians use. It wasn't until 1975, with the Book of Tofu that I'm cooking from right now, that many Americans were first introduced to tofu as an ingredient. Let's get started with our next recipe, which is tofu with tahini sauce. This recipe does use a whole 36 ounces of tofu, which felt like a lot for just me, so I'm going to be dividing this recipe into thirds. So we're going to be starting with 12 ounces of tofu. One thing I've noticed about this cookbook is that it tends to work in increments of 12, whereas these days we get our blocks of tofu in 16-ounce sections. So I don't know if this is a quirk of the cookbook or if tofu used to be sold more often in 12-ounce increments. And the first thing we're gonna do is marinate. We're gonna use a 1/4 cup of soy sauce and a 1/4 cup of water. And then we're just gonna let it sit. Next, let's move on to the sauce. We're gonna add tahini and dilute it with water. It also has you add mace, but since I do not have any mace, I'm just gonna be using nutmeg since they are made from the same seed. Whisk together until smooth. Next, we're gonna saute some onions with about a teaspoon of soy sauce. Next, we're gonna add in the diluted tahini, and it said to cook for a long time on a low heat until it has the consistency of a thick custard. In the meantime, we're gonna bake our tofu. Here's our marinated tofu. We're gonna cook it for about 15 minutes at 350 degrees. Our tofu has been cooked, so we're gonna drain off all the remaining marinade. Finally, we're gonna top with the tahini sauce and chopped scallions. Obviously, I think it should be recognized that if it weren't for the work of these early vegetarians of the 1970s, veganism and vegetarianism would not be what they are today. Back then, there weren't dozens of different meat and cheese alternatives on grocery store shelves, and you couldn't just type into Google seitan recipes and come up with literally millions of results. You really had to rely on books like this one that were publishing vegetarian and vegan recipes, putting forth creativity, and normalizing not eating meat. I'm super appreciative to early vegetarians who sort of paved the way so that I have all the choices and resources that I do. Without more ado, today we're going to be rating our recipes on my homemade scale, which ranges from soy bad to tofu king good. I didn't come up with puns for the middle ones. Let's taste our tahini tofu. This is better than it looks. The tofu that was sort of just almost warmed in the oven with that marinade, I thought it wasn't really gonna have a lot of flavor, but the outside really does have a nice soy flavor. The sauce by itself really tastes mostly just like tahini, which isn't bad, but I don't think that we needed to like make a sauce. We almost could have just put tahini on it. That little bit of nutmeg coming through, which was supposed to be mace, is nice. Overall, I would say it's very simple, but it was pretty easy to make. I would put it on my scale, maybe here. Just a little bit high of neutral, a little bit towards tofu king good. Our soup should be chilled by now, so let's get some of that. Cream of tomato tofu soup. It is very thick, and the color really lends itself more towards the cream and the tofu than it does the tomato. I garnished with some fresh parsley per the recommendations, and I'm trying it chilled. It tastes like onions that have been not all the way cooked, but are not raw, and like tofu and like oat milk with a hint of tomato. The parsley in it is very nice. The texture is thick. I was on the fence of whether or not I would enjoy this. I am not on the fence anymore. Sorry. Finally, let's go on to our last recipe. This is the one I most wanted to try because frankly, I just don't really get it. We're going to be making chilled tofu with applesauce and granola. Let's grab a bowl. We're gonna add 6 ounces of tofu and 1/4 teaspoon of salt and mash them together. This may be the ultimate hippie vegetarian dish because this is not only going to include tofu, we're gonna add some granola to it as well. Next, we're gonna add applesauce and raisins. Mix that all together. It says to serve with a dash of cinnamon and some granola. All right, let's give this tofu breakfast option a go. This surprised me in that it looks much more appetizing than I had imagined it would. It almost looks more like a porridge. I'm pleasantly surprised by this. It has sort of the texture of like a tofu-y porridge. Not like sort of like the juiciness of applesauce per se, which I thought it would. It has the sweetness from the applesauce. A lot of the weight here is being carried by the cinnamon, and the crunch of the granola is essential. It's not too bad. I might add some sweetener to it, add some more nuts perhaps, I don't know. But all in all, I am absolutely pleasantly surprised. It is not quite enough to make it into this Tofu King Good section, but I will put it solidly in the yellow. It gets extra points for originality. And honestly, it probably gets some extra points because I really, really did not expect this to be good. What a wild ride, you guys. I had so much fun making these tofu recipes with you. Many thanks again to the authors of the Book of Tofu for putting all this creativity out into the world. Plant-based food would not be the same without the dedication of individuals like yourselves. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let us know in the comments what some of your favorite or maybe some of your least favorite tofu recipes are. If you wanted to make our day, you could subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll know the next time that we post. Peace out!